She sat on the cold stone near the busy street, as she did every morning, and held the small broken keyboard close to her body. The keys were scratched, and a few of them did not work at all, but it was the only thing she had managed to save from the night she lost everything. People walked past her in a hurry, some with cups of coffee, some looking at their phones, some talking loudly about work or school or home, things she once had but no longer remembered in a complete way. She tried not to think about all that. She only thought about the music she could still make even with this old keyboard, and how maybe someone would stop and listen long enough to give her some food. She was hungry, but she had become used to that feeling. What she had not grown used to was the feeling of being invisible. Every day she pressed the same small button to turn the keyboard on, and most days it worked. The little red light blinked weakly, and she waited as the sound wobbled for a moment. Then she placed her fingers on the keys and began to play the soft tune she always played first. She played slowly so that the missing keys did not create too many gaps in the music. People rarely turned their heads, and when they did, they looked away quickly. A few children stared for a moment, curious about the girl sitting alone on the ground, but their parents always pulled them along. She tried not to feel sad when that happened. She told herself that it did not matter if people did not look at her. What mattered was that she played. The music helped her stay calm. It made her remember that she was still here. She had lost her parents, then her home, then almost everything else, but the music stayed. It was the only thing that reminded her of better days. She did not have words to describe how much she missed those days, but she did not need words. She had the keys, the sounds, the small tunes she remembered from long ago. Sometimes she wondered if her parents would be proud of her for continuing to play even when life had fallen apart. She wondered if they would be sad to see her alone like this. She wondered if they would want her to keep trying or to give up. She never knew the answer, so she chose to keep trying because that was the only choice that felt right. She told herself that if she played one more day, maybe something good would happen. Maybe someone would notice. Maybe someone would hear the music the way she meant it, to be heard. By midday, the sun grew strong, and the street grew louder. Cars honked, vendors shouted, and the crowd became thicker. She kept playing through all the noise. Her hands were thin, and her fingers sometimes trembled because she had not eaten enough. But she pressed the keys carefully and kept the rhythm steady. A few people dropped small coins near her feet, and she thanked each one with a small nod. Some did not look at her face at all as they dropped the coins. They only wanted to feel they had done something kind before walking away. She wished someone would stop just for a moment, not to give money, but to simply listen. She wanted someone to hear her properly, to hear the part of her heart she tried to put into each note. But no one seemed to have time for that, and she pretended she did not care. In the late afternoon, a group of teenagers walked by. They were loud and full of energy, pushing each other playfully. One of them pointed at her and said something that made the others laugh. She lowered her head, but kept playing. She hoped they would keep walking, but they did not. They stood in front of her and made jokes about her keyboard, her clothes, her hair that was tangled and dusty. She tried to ignore them. She kept her eyes on the keys and counted silently in her mind the way she used to do during practice. One of the teens raised a phone and started recording her. Another laughed and said she sounded like someone who was learning music for the first time. She felt her chest tighten, but her hands kept moving. She knew her music sounded weak on this broken keyboard. She knew they would never believe she could play much better than this if she had a proper instrument. But she had no way to prove it, and the thought hurt more than she wanted to admit. After a few minutes, the teens finally walked away, still laughing. She waited until they were far before she let out a slow breath. Her hands shook a little, but she wiped them on her clothes and continued playing. She told herself not to let the words matter. She had heard worse. She had survived worse. But even so, the sting of their laughter stayed with her longer than she liked Dot as the sky began to turn orange. She stopped playing and looked at the small coins she had collected. It was not much, but it was enough to buy a piece of bread. She carefully placed the coins in her pocket, turned off the keyboard, and held it close to her chest. She walked slowly toward a small shop at the corner. The owner of the shop nodded at her when she walked in. He knew she only came to buy the cheapest food. She handed him the coins and received a small roll of bread in return. She thanked him softly and stepped outside to eat it. She sat on the curb and ate the bread slowly so it would last longer. As she ate, she looked at the people around her. Families walked by holding hands. Friends laughed and shared stories. Workers hurried home. No one paid attention to her, and she wondered again what it would feel like to belong somewhere. She wondered what it would feel like to have someone waiting for her at the end of the day. When her small meal was finished, she hugged her keyboard and returned to the place where she spent her nights. It was not really a home. It was just a sheltered corner behind a closed shop where the wind was not too strong. She spread out her thin blanket and sat down. She looked at her keyboard again and thought about the years when she had played on a real piano. She remembered how smooth the keys were, how rich the notes sounded, how much joy she felt each time she finished a piece. That piano had been in her old home, the home she had lost so suddenly. She closed her eyes and tried to hold the memory tight. At night, the street grew quiet, and she listened to the distant sound of traffic. She wondered if tomorrow would be any different. She wondered if she would earn enough food again. She wondered if the teens would come back to laugh at her. She wondered if anyone in the world still cared about the girl she used to be. She knew she could not control any of these things. All she could do was wake up, turn on her broken keyboard, and play the best she could. She believed deep inside that music had saved her once, and maybe it could save her again. She did not know how or when. She only knew that she had to keep playing, because giving up was not something her heart understood. As she curled up to sleep, she whispered a small promise to herself. She promised she would keep trying no matter how hard the days became. She promised she would not let the world erase her completely. She promised she would hold on to her music, because it was the only part of her life that still felt real. And maybe, just maybe, if she kept playing long enough, someone would finally hear her the way she hoped to be heard. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual, the cold air cutting through her thin blanket. She brushed her hair back as best as she could and took her small keyboard into her hands. The street was already noisy with people going to work, and the smells of food from nearby stalls filled the air. She found her usual spot near the corner, where she could see people walking past without being too close to traffic. She placed the keyboard on the ground and turned it on. The small light flickered weakly, just like the day before. She pressed a key, listened to the weak sound it made, and then began her morning tune. The notes were soft at first, barely audible over the noise of the street, but she played anyway. Her hands moved carefully, remembering the melody she had practiced in her home long ago. She played with a quiet determination. She did not know if anyone was listening. Most people still passed by, heads down, talking or thinking about their own lives. A few coins fell near her feet, but she could not see who dropped them. She only felt a little relief that her hunger might be satisfied for the morning. As the morning grew brighter, she noticed a group of teenagers approaching. She recognized them from the day before. They laughed loudly, pushing each other and pointing at her. One of them whispered something, and the others laughed even harder. She felt a tightness in her chest, but did not stop playing. She lowered her eyes to the keys, pretending not to notice them. She reminded herself that their words could not touch the music she carried inside her. The tallest boy in the group stepped closer and kicked the edge of her keyboard lightly. The sound it made was sharp and sudden. She flinched, but kept her hands on the keys. The boy laughed, and his friends recorded her with their phones. They made jokes about how her music sounded broken, and how funny it was to see someone like her try to play such an instrument. She felt anger rise for a moment, a fire she had never felt before, but she swallowed it and continued playing. She could not let them win. She had learned a long time ago that people like this only wanted to hurt. They did not understand her. One girl from the group stepped forward and tapped her shoulder. "Hey, why do you even bother?" she asked, her voice sharp and mocking. "You are never going to be a real musician with that thing." The girl looked at her with a smirk, expecting a reaction. The homeless girl looked at her hands, then at the broken keys, then back at the people around her. She did not speak. She only nodded slightly and kept playing. The notes trembled, but her fingers refused to stop. She wanted them to see that she was stronger than their words. The group laughed even more and walked a little farther, still recording and making fun. She kept playing, but now her hands shook slightly. She was hungry, tired, and frustrated, but she would not let them see her cry. She had learned that the world was not kind to someone like her. She had to be strong, even when she felt weak. She reminded herself that one day, the music would be heard the way she intended. One day, someone would understand Dot as she played. A few people stopped to listen. Not many, just a few who were curious or maybe felt pity. She did not care about pity. She wanted attention for the music, not for her sadness. She imagined the notes as birds flying, carrying her feelings across the busy street. She wanted the people to feel something, even if it was just a moment of calm in their rushed day. She wanted them to see the beauty in something broken. Dot by midday, she had gathered a few coins. It was enough for a small meal, and she thanked the people who dropped them with a quiet nod or a soft smile. She had learned that gestures mattered as much as words, sometimes more. She ate her meal quickly, hiding behind a newspaper to shield herself from the harsh sun. Her fingers itched to play, but she knew she needed to rest for a moment. Hunger made it hard to focus, but she forced herself to feel grateful for what little she had. After she finished eating, she went back to her keyboard. A small crowd had formed, not many, but enough to make her nervous. She had learned that people sometimes judged too quickly. She played carefully, making sure her notes did not break the fragile flow of attention. Her music started soft, but as she continued, it grew richer. She remembered the songs she had once played in the living room of her old home, the pieces her parents loved. She poured herself into the music, and the crowd responded with quiet interest. A few even clapped when she finished a small piece. The sound of real appreciation made her heart leap in a way she had not felt in a long time. The teenagers returned later in the afternoon. They were louder than before and seemed more determined to mock her. One of them stepped close and tried to knock over her keyboard again. She moved back slightly, protecting the small instrument with her body. She looked at the boy with steady eyes, refusing to show fear. The boy laughed and made a mean comment, and his friends joined in. They said things about her clothes, her hair, her life, and how she would never amount to anything. She felt a sting, but she did not stop. She played louder, letting the music drown out the voices. A woman walking by noticed the commotion and stopped. She saw the girl playing despite the teasing, and she looked amazed. She watched silently, her face softening as she listened to the music. The notes were imperfect, but the effort and the feeling behind them were unmistakable. The woman whispered something under her breath, almost as if she was speaking to the girl without words. The girl, too focused on her playing, did not notice, but the feeling of being seen, even briefly, warmed her heart. The teens grew frustrated because the girl did not react the way they wanted. They threw one last comment and walked away, muttering to each other. She exhaled slowly, letting her body relax. She continued playing, her hands moving over the keys with more care now. The energy of the street seemed to shift around her. People who had been in a hurry slowed down. Some stopped to drop a coin or two, and a few stood just to listen for a moment longer. She noticed the small changes, but did not let herself be distracted from the music. Evening came, and the shadows grew long. She packed up her keyboard carefully, making sure it was safe for another night. She walked toward the corner where she usually spent her nights. The cold air bit at her arms, and her stomach grumbled again, but she ignored it. She focused on keeping her body moving steadily. When she reached her little corner, she set up her blanket and sat down, holding the keyboard in her lap. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the day in her bones. She had survived another day, another round of mockery, and she had not stopped playing. That alone felt like a small victory. She thought about the teenagers and their laughter, about the few people who had stopped to watch her, about the coins she had collected. She wondered if life would ever change, if people would ever see her for more than a homeless girl with a broken keyboard. She wanted to believe that something good was waiting, something that would recognize her talent, her spirit, her resilience. She clung to that hope like a lifeline. The night was quiet, and she could hear the distant hum of cars and the occasional shout from someone walking home late. She placed her fingers on the keyboard again, though no one would hear her tonight. She played softly, letting the notes float into the night air. The music reminded her of her parents, of the home she had lost, of the dreams she had not given up on. She played until her fingers hurt and her eyes grew heavy. Before closing her eyes, she whispered a small promise to herself. She promised she would continue to play, no matter how many people laughed at her. She promised she would not let the world make her stop. She promised that one day someone would hear her properly, and they would understand the depth of her talent. With that thought, she curled up under her thin blanket, holding her keyboard close and let sleep take her. Ready to face another day of struggle and hope. The next day began colder than usual, and she shivered as she stepped out into the quiet street. The sky was gray, and the wind pushed against her thin clothes, reminding her once again of the world outside and how harsh it could feel. She carried her keyboard carefully, cradling it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. She reached her usual corner and set the keyboard down, pressing the small power button. The familiar red light blinked on as she let her fingers hover above the keys. Feeling the smoothness of some and the cracks of others. She began to play the morning tune. Slowly at first, letting the sounds fill the empty space around her. Her fingers moved carefully, each note carrying a memory she could not forget. People passed by as usual, heads down, talking, walking, looking at the pavement or their phones. She did not let it bother her. The music was her companion. It reminded her that she still existed in a world that often seemed to ignore her. By late morning, she noticed a few people stopping to watch her. They were not many, only a handful, but it gave her a strange feeling of warmth she had not felt in a long time. One older man stood quietly, listening to the imperfect but heartfelt music. He gave her a small nod when he left, a gesture that felt more significant than any words. She smiled faintly, the smallest curve of hope appearing on her lips. Maybe the world was noticing, slowly, one person at a time. Later, a heavy rain started, sudden and cold. She tried to cover herself and the keyboard with her thin blanket, but the wind forced the water against her. She looked around for shelter and noticed a small music store with glass windows, closed for the day. She moved quickly toward it, hoping to find a corner to hide from the rain. The glass reflected her pale, wet face, and she noticed the sadness in her own eyes. Inside, through the window, she saw a piano standing in the center of the store. The wood was polished, the keys smooth, and it looked perfect. She felt a pang of longing, a memory of the piano she once had at home, the one her parents loved. She pressed her face against the glass and let her fingers touch the window, imagining the notes she could play. When the store owner arrived the next morning, he found her sitting outside, shivering and holding her keyboard. He looked at her for a moment, curious, and then said softly, "Can you play?" She hesitated but nodded. She had learned to trust very few people, but there was something kind in his eyes. He opened the door and motioned for her to come inside. She stepped cautiously, still hugging her keyboard, and approached the grand piano that gleamed under the morning light. She placed her hands on the keys, and a memory of her past life rushed through her. The piano responded beautifully, perfectly, every key singing like it was meant for her. The notes filled the room, pure and powerful. The store owner froze, astonished at what he was hearing. He had not expected a street girl to play like that, to touch music with such mastery. She played a melody she had memorized from her childhood, one her parents loved. Her eyes closed, and the music flowed from her heart. She could feel it, remember every sound, every pause, every emotion. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she did not stop. The piano understood her. It carried her pain, her memories, her dreams. She had never felt anything so complete. The store owner, still silent, watched her play. He did not want to interrupt, not wanting to shatter the magic in the room. When she finished, the silence was heavy. She opened her eyes and looked around, noticing the man standing quietly. He clapped softly, and she looked at him, startled. "That was amazing," he said. "Do you always play like this?" She nodded, feeling shy and exposed. The truth was, she had always played like this in private, but no one had ever heard her. Until now. She felt a mix of fear and excitement. Could this change things? Could someone finally see who she truly was? Over the next few days, she returned to the store. She practiced whenever the owner was there, learning to trust him with her music. The keyboard she carried became secondary. The real piano allowed her to play the pieces she had dreamed of for years. She remembered the joy she had felt as a child, the way music had made her feel alive. Now, for the first time in a long while, she felt alive again. She began to hope that one day her music would reach more people, not just one kind stranger. As she practiced, she noticed small changes in herself. She walked taller, smiled more, and even spoke a little with the store owner. She learned to relax her fingers, to let the music flow naturally instead of forcing it. Every day she discovered something new about her own talent. She felt proud, a feeling that had been rare in her life. The music gave her strength, courage, and a sense of belonging she had almost forgotten. One afternoon, while she was playing a particularly difficult piece, a few people passing by the street stopped to listen through the store window. They had no idea who she was, only curious about the sound that filled the air. She played with all her heart, unaware of the small audience. They watched silently, impressed by the skill and emotion in her hands. For the first time, she realized that music could reach people without words, without explanations, without permission. The music spoke for her, telling the story of her life and her resilience. Later that evening, she packed up her keyboard and prepared to leave. She hugged the piano gently, feeling a deep gratitude for the chance to play on something real again. The store owner smiled at her. "Keep coming," he said. "The music needs to be heard." She nodded, feeling a sense of purpose she had not felt in a long time. It was not just about surviving anymore. It was about sharing her gift, her passion, her soul. She stepped back into the street, the city lights beginning to glow as night approached. She felt the weight of her past, but also the lightness of hope. She knew that the world outside could still be cruel, that people could still mock and ignore her. But she had discovered something stronger: her talent, her heart, and the courage to show it. She promised herself she would never stop playing, never let the world silence her. That night, as she curled up under her thin blanket, she held her keyboard close and thought about the piano in the store. She imagined the notes she had played and the music still inside her. She whispered a quiet promise to herself, stronger than ever. She would keep playing, keep dreaming, and one day someone would hear her fully. For now, she closed her eyes, letting the music live in her mind, carrying her into sleep filled with hope and the sound of a piano she knew she could master. The morning was cool and calm, with the city waking slowly under the soft light of early sun. She carried her keyboard down the familiar streets, feeling a quiet excitement in her chest. The piano at the store had changed something inside her. Every note she played now felt alive, stronger, and full of a depth she had not realized she possessed. She had returned to the store the day before and played for the owner again. Each time she pressed the keys, memories, emotions, and hope poured through her fingertips. Today, she thought, she would try something new, something bold. She found her spot near the corner where people usually passed quickly. The street was busier than usual, with vendors shouting, children running, and people walking in different directions. She placed her keyboard carefully, pressed the power button, and let the little red light blink on. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment, taking a deep breath, and then she began to play. The notes flowed gently, growing in confidence as she remembered the feeling of the grand piano in the store. It was as if the music had learned to carry her spirit, and she was no longer afraid to show it. A few people stopped to watch her immediately. They were strangers, curious about the sound that was different from the usual street noise. She could see a small boy, holding his mother's hand, staring wide-eyed at the girl who played so earnestly. A man walking past paused mid-step, listening silently as the melody filled the air. She did not know them, but their attention gave her courage. She played with care, her fingers moving more freely than ever. Even on her imperfect keyboard dot later in the morning, the same teenagers who had mocked her before appeared. They laughed as they approached, pointing at her keyboard and whispering to each other. She took a deep breath and kept her eyes on the keys. She had learned to ignore them, but she could feel their mocking energy surrounding her. One of them kicked the side of her keyboard lightly, trying to get a reaction. She only kept playing, louder this time, as if the music itself was protecting her. Her fingers danced over the keys, and the sounds were bolder, more confident. She imagined each note growing wings, flying past the teens, showing them the power they could not understand. The teens recorded her with their phones, laughing and making fun of her, but she did not stop. Something inside her had shifted. The music was no longer just survival. It was expression. It was proof that she had strength, talent, and a story that mattered. She played for herself, for the piano inside her, and for the quiet audience who had begun to gather. Their eyes followed her hands, and some of them even clapped softly when she finished a piece. The teens stared in disbelief, unsure how to react. They had expected weakness, and instead saw skill and confidence they had never imagined. A woman standing at a distance approached slowly. She had noticed the girl through the crowd the day before, but had not spoken. Now she stopped and watched intently. The notes were simple yet filled with emotion, telling a story of struggle, hope, and resilience. She whispered to herself, amazed that someone so young could carry such depth in music. The homeless girl played without looking up, unaware that she had captivated more than just one pair of eyes. She was in her world, where the music flowed naturally and fully, free from mockery or judgment. Throughout the morning, more people stopped to listen. Some dropped coins near her feet, Others simply stayed to watch and absorb the music. She had never imagined that her little corner of the street could become a place where people paused, even briefly, to feel something different. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a connection that she had not felt in a long time. For a moment, the world outside seemed softer, less harsh, and filled with possibility. As the sun climbed higher, she packed up her keyboard, briefly, to take a short break. She bought a small piece of bread from a nearby stall, eating slowly and savoring the warmth of the food. She watched people move around her, realizing that while some still ignored her, many more had stopped to see her play. It gave her hope that maybe one day, more people would hear her the way she deserved to be heard. She thought about the piano in the store and the way the notes had resonated so perfectly. It reminded her that talent could survive even in the hardest circumstances. By afternoon, the street was busier, and she returned to her spot. The same teenagers had not returned yet, and she felt a sense of relief. She began to play a longer piece, a composition she had practiced in secret for months. Her fingers moved with confidence, hitting the notes precisely, despite the limitations of her keyboard. People passing by slowed, listening with interest. A few even stopped to record her, not to mock, but to share the beauty they had witnessed. Her heart lifted, realizing that the music could reach beyond the small corner of the street. It could touch lives. The store owner had stopped by earlier, silently observing from a distance. He had seen her play on the grand piano in his store, but seeing her perform on the street, facing challenges and mockery, filled him with admiration. He realized that her talent was not just in her skill, but in her courage to continue playing despite obstacles. He made a mental note to share her story, to help her find a larger audience, but he wanted her to feel ready. For now, he stayed back, letting her grow in confidence. As evening approached, she packed up again and walked toward her usual corner for the night. She hugged her keyboard close and reflected on the day. The moments of attention, the small audience, the applause, and the connection with people had made her feel alive in a way she had not in years. She knew the journey would be difficult, that the street could still be cruel, and that some people would never understand. But she also knew that her music could break through barriers, even if only for a moment. That night, she sat on her blanket, placing the keyboard beside her. She replayed the day in her mind, remembering the expressions on the faces of those who had listened. She imagined the music floating over the city, reaching ears that needed to hear it. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment and gratitude. The piano at the store had shown her what she could do, but today she had shared a part of herself with the world. Even in her small corner, she had made an impact. Before falling asleep, she whispered a promise to herself. She promised to continue playing, to keep the music alive, and to never let anyone or anything silence her. She promised to work toward a future where her talent could be seen and appreciated fully. She held her keyboard close and let the sounds of her imagination carry her into sleep, dreaming of the day when her music would be heard by more than just a few passers-by. In her heart, she knew that this was only the beginning of a journey that would change her life forever. The day began with a light mist covering the streets, and she could see her breath as she walked with the keyboard under her arm. The city was slowly waking up as she moved carefully through the crowd, aware of the busy streets around her. She reached her usual corner and placed the keyboard on the ground, turning it on with a soft click. The red light blinked weakly, as always, but it was enough to remind her that she was ready to play. She pressed the keys gently, letting the first notes float into the quiet morning air. Today felt different. She could not explain why, but a sense of anticipation ran through her chest. Perhaps it was the memory of the previous days when more people had stopped to watch her, or maybe it was the thought of the piano at the store that had shown her what was possible. Whatever it was, she felt a determination to play not just for survival, but to show the music she carried within herself. to let it shine despite her circumstances. As she played, people began to gather, more than she had ever seen before. Passers-by slowed down, some stopping to listen, some standing at a distance, mesmerized by the sound. The notes were stronger today, confident and clear. She played melodies that she had practiced for years in secret, pieces that told stories of her past, her struggles, and her hopes. She felt the music flowing from her heart, carrying her emotions to everyone who would listen. A small boy sat on the curb nearby, eyes wide as he watched her fingers move. A woman placed her hand gently on his shoulder, watching silently, clearly moved by what she was hearing. The girl at the keyboard did not notice them. She was lost in her music. The sound filled the street, cutting through the noise of traffic, vendors, and chatter. For the first time, she felt that the music was bigger than her struggles, bigger than the mocking words that had followed her for so long. The teenagers from before appeared again, and for a moment her heart sank. They laughed and whispered among themselves, expecting to see her fail. One of them pointed a finger, ready to mock, but when she began to play a complex and powerful piece, their laughter stopped. They looked at her in disbelief, eyes wide, mouths slightly open. The notes were precise, passionate, and full of emotion. They had never expected this. The girl at the keyboard did not falter. She played as if the music were her voice, telling a story they could not interrupt or judge. The crowd that had gathered began to react. Some clapped softly. Others held their hands over their mouths in amazement. A man in a suit who had been rushing past stopped, mesmerized. Even the teens could not deny the beauty they were witnessing. They had come expecting to mock, but instead, they saw a young girl expressing herself in a way that was beyond their understanding. One of them muttered something, but no one else heard, and it did not matter. The music had silenced all other noise. People started taking out their phones, not to laugh, but to capture the moment. The sound of coins falling into the small container at her feet mingled with the claps and whispers of awe. She had never experienced anything like this. For years, she had played in silence, ignored by the world, laughed at, and overlooked. Now, the music was finally heard the way it deserved to be. It reached the ears and hearts of people who had no idea about the struggles she faced daily. The store owner arrived quietly, standing at the back of the crowd. He had known her talent, had heard her play on the grand piano, but seeing her perform here, under pressure and scrutiny, filled him with pride. He understood that her courage was just as remarkable as her skill. He watched as people, even strangers, were touched by her music. Some had tears in their eyes. Some whispered to one another, clearly moved by the emotions carried in each note. The teens, who had once mocked her, now looked embarrassed and unsure of what to do. Their laughter had disappeared, replaced by a quiet astonishment. The leader of the group stepped forward, and for the first time she saw hesitation in his eyes. He wanted to say something, perhaps apologize, but the music still held her attention, and she did not break focus. The notes flowed from her heart, commanding respect, demanding to be heard. It was a moment of triumph, silent and powerful. The afternoon passed with her playing continuously, her fingers moving effortlessly despite fatigue. The crowd remained, swelling as more people heard the music. Some came closer, some stopped at a distance, but all were drawn to the sound. The street that had once ignored her, that had been harsh and unwelcoming, now seemed to embrace her presence. She felt the music connecting her to the people around her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen. By evening, the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the street. She finished the final piece she had prepared for the day, letting the last notes linger in the air. The crowd erupted into applause, some cheering, some clapping softly, all expressing a shared recognition of her talent. She felt tears in her eyes but smiled, feeling a mix of relief, joy, and pride. She had played not for survival, not for pity, but for expression, and the world had responded. The teenagers approached slowly, humbled and quiet. One of them stepped forward and muttered, I'm sorry." She looked at him, surprised, and saw genuine regret in his eyes. She nodded softly, offering a small smile, understanding that anger could not change the past. She had forgiven them, and she felt a lightness in her heart she had not expected. The music had not only shown her talent, but also her strength and grace. As night fell, she packed up her keyboard carefully, feeling a sense of accomplishment that went beyond anything she had known. She walked toward her usual shelter, reflecting on the day. The applause, the eyes watching, the small gestures of kindness had given her a glimpse of what could be possible. She knew that life would still be difficult, but she also knew that her music had power. It could reach people, touch hearts, and perhaps even change her life. That night, she curled up under her thin blanket, her keyboard close. She replayed the day in her mind, the faces of the crowd, the surprise of the teens, the silent admiration of strangers, and the pride in the store owner's eyes. She whispered to herself a promise, stronger than ever. She would continue to play, to grow, to share her music with the world. She closed her eyes, letting the sound of her imagination fill her mind, dreaming of a future where her talent would shine and be recognized, where her music would no longer be ignored, and where she could finally feel the acceptance and wonder she had longed for her entire life. The morning air was fresh and cool as she carried her keyboard down the familiar streets. Today felt heavier with possibility than any day before. She could feel it in her chest, a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. The past few days had changed her. The street, once a place of struggle and mockery, had become a space where people began to notice her music. Today, she hoped it could go further, perhaps reaching someone who could help her realize the full potential of her talent. She set her keyboard carefully at the corner and pressed the power button. The small red light blinked on, and she let her fingers hover over the keys, feeling the familiar texture and imagining the grand piano in the store. She began to play softly, the notes flowing gently at first, carrying the calm of morning through the busy street. Slowly, she allowed the music to grow, each note stronger than the last, full of emotion and history. She poured herself into the sound, playing pieces she had practiced secretly for years, melodies that told the story of her life, her struggles, and her hope. People began to gather quickly, more than she had ever seen. Some stopped because they were curious, others because the music drew them in. She noticed familiar faces among the crowd, people who had paused on previous days to listen, now standing with smiles, eager to hear more. A few children sat cross-legged on the pavement, completely still, as if they were afraid to break the magic of the music. She did not notice them individually, but she felt the connection between her and the audience, a silent communication that transcended words. Mid-morning. The teenagers appeared once more, the same group who had mocked her so many times before. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and did not stop playing. She felt a quiet power in the music, a strength that came from all the hardships she had endured. They walked closer, whispering to each other, clearly unsure of how to react. She continued, more confident than ever, letting each note tell its story, each melody convey her courage, resilience, and depth. A woman from the crowd stepped forward, moving closer to the keyboard. Her eyes glistened with tears, and she whispered something under her breath, moved by the music. She stayed quietly, listening to every note, feeling the emotion behind each one. Others followed her example, standing respectfully, holding their phones not to mock, but to capture a moment that was powerful and rare. She felt a warmth spreading in her chest. The music was being heard, truly heard, in a way that no one had before. The store owner arrived during the performance, standing at the back of the crowd. He had been silent for days, observing her growth, her courage, and the raw talent that shone through every note. He realized that she was ready for more, that her music deserved an audience beyond the street. He did not want to interrupt, not yet. He simply watched, marveling at how she had taken a broken keyboard and turned it into a bridge between herself and the world. She had transformed the street into a stage, the passers-by into an audience, and herself into a musician of undeniable skill. By afternoon, the performance drew attention from local media. A few reporters and camera crews arrived, curious about the girl who had captured the hearts of so many on the street. They filmed her quietly, careful not to disturb her focus. She noticed them, but did not falter. Her fingers flew over the keys, playing with precision, passion, and grace. The music became larger than herself, carrying stories of pain, hope, resilience, and talent. People who had once ignored her stopped in their tracks, watching in amazement as the girl they had walked past, without notice, now commanded their attention with her art. The teenagers stood at the edge of the crowd, completely silent this time. They had expected mockery, laughter, and chaos, but instead they found themselves witnessing greatness. They watched her hands, the way she moved with confidence, the way the music seemed to flow from her very soul. Some shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had judged her too quickly. One of them stepped forward hesitantly, muttering an apology. She looked at him briefly, nodding with quiet acknowledgement, but her eyes returned to the keys. Forgiveness was not immediate, but she had learned the power of resilience and grace. And that power now shone through her music. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow across the street, the music reached its peak. Her fingers moved with speed and accuracy, each note resonating with emotion. People in the crowd were mesmerized, some with tears in their eyes, others with faces lifted in awe. She felt their energy, their admiration, their silent gratitude for being allowed to witness something so beautiful. The street had transformed into a sanctuary of sound, a place where the weight of the world seemed lighter for just a moment. When she finished, the silence that followed was thick, as if the world itself paused to honor the moment. Then slowly, applause erupted, soft at first, then growing into a chorus of admiration. People clapped, cheered, and some even cried openly. The teenagers stepped back, humbled and awed, while the store owner smiled proudly. He knew that this was the turning point, the moment where her life could change entirely. The music had done what words could not. It had shown the world who she was, the depth of her talent, and the strength of her spirit. After the crowd dispersed slightly, the store owner approached her gently. "You have a gift," he said, his voice warm and steady. "The world needs to hear it. You deserve more than this street. Would you like to take your music further?" She looked at him, eyes wide, heart racing. She had dreamed of this, imagined it countless times, but now it was real. She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. She could hardly believe that the journey she had begun alone, with only a broken keyboard, could lead to an opportunity like this. Over the next days, arrangements were made. Organizations that supported young musicians heard her story, watched her perform, and offered scholarships and safe housing. She was given proper lessons and access to instruments she had only dreamed of. For the first time in years, she felt security, a sense of belonging, and a clear path forward. The city streets that had been her stage were now behind her, but the lessons they taught her, the courage they built, and the resilience they inspired would remain forever. The teenagers who had mocked her approached eventually, quietly, one by one, offering apologies. She listened, understanding that their ignorance and fear had driven their actions. She smiled softly, forgiving them, and in that moment, she realized that her music had not only changed her life, but had also opened the hearts of those who once doubted her. She had transformed judgment into respect, mockery into wonder, and solitude into recognition. Her life continued to change. She performed in recitals, in community events, and even on larger stages. People were amazed by her story and her skill. She remained humble, remembering the streets where she had started, the cold nights, the hunger, the teasing, and the broken keyboard that had never let her give up. Each performance carried a piece of her past, each note a testament to the journey she had endured. At night, she often reflected quietly. She thought about the little victories, the moments of beauty that had appeared even in hardship, and the people who had believed in her along the way. She never forgot the street, the people who had stopped briefly to listen, or the lessons learned from mockery and survival. She realized that her music was not just her talent, but her story, her courage, and her heart. It had the power to heal, inspire, and change lives, including her own. She made a promise to herself, one stronger than any before. She would continue to play, to grow, to inspire, and to share her gift with the world. The girl who once played for food on the street was now a young woman whose music carried hope, wonder, and life. Her journey was far from over, but she had learned that even from the darkest places, beauty, talent, and recognition could emerge. And with each note she played, she reminded the world and herself that no circumstance could ever silence true genius and courage.